Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is May the 6th, 2024. It has been 3,752 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 76 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, and 2 years and 73 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression. Today's podcast looks at events that happened over the weekend. During the podcast, you will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. A link is in the podcast description. There are map updates today. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian male bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. 1. Intelligence agencies in the United Kingdom and Estonia also assessed that Russia started its spring-summer offensive prematurely due to the re-establishment of military aid from the United States. 2. Our assessment that Russia would target civilians and civilian infrastructure over the Orthodox Easter weekend was regrettably accurate. 3. We maintain there is an elevated risk of large-scale drone and missile attacks against Ukrainian civilians and civilian infrastructure from May the 6th to May the 10th due to the inauguration of Russian autocrat Vladimir Putin and the May the 9th Victory Day celebrations in Russia. 4. Ukrainian personnel shortages are extending deployment times, limiting troop rotations and forcing combat ineffective units to maintain defensive positions, which is contributing to Russia's ongoing tactical advances. 5. Russian forces continue to exploit the delays in significant military aid from the US, the Czech Republic-led Ammunition Initiative, the European Union, and the United Kingdom, carrying out another 319 attacks over the weekend. 6. It will take another 2 to 4 weeks for significant military aid to reach the front lines, which should aid in stabilizing Ukrainian ground and air defenses. 7. We maintain renewed Russian chatter of a looming large-scale attack to capture the city of Kharkiv is a psychological operation. 8. Russia will not achieve its operational goal of capturing Chasiv Yar by May the 9th, but attacks will continue regardless of the cost. This is the last day for this entry. 9. Russia continues to set conditions for a larger attack in the direction of Malinivka and Vuhledar. 10. The world is caught in the mutually assured destruction and stability paradox. 11. Russia's trampling of international humanitarian law has been accelerating since March the 22nd. We maintain that the willful ignoring of blatant Russian war crimes by international watchdogs will continue to encourage escalation. 12. Multiple European government intelligence agencies have also assessed that the disjointed response to Russian threats directed at Ukraine's allies is encouraging Moscow to expand its global hybrid warfare campaigns. We maintain that continued inaction and the excessively risk-averse rules of engagement support an environment ripe for a serious international incident. 13. The attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure have incrementally increased the chance of an intentional nuclear accident at multiple nuclear facilities in Ukraine, and the situation is more serious, especially at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, than what the International Atomic Energy Agency is reporting. Over the Orthodox Easter weekend, Russia carried out significant attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure, causing dozens of casualties. From May the 3rd to the 5th, 37 Shahed-136 one-way drones were launched at Ukraine, with 36 shot down. Russia also fired at least 4 S-300 anti-aircraft missiles used for ground attack, 2 Iskander-K ballistic cruise missiles, 2 Kh-59 air-to-surface guided missiles, and numerous 300mm Smerch rockets fired by MLRS, that's multiple launch rocket systems. This is in addition to hundreds of bombing sorties carried out by the VKS, also called the Russian Aerospace Forces. On Saturday, just after midnight, a Shahed-136 one-way drone struck Kharkiv. 6 civilians were injured, including an 8-year-old girl. The strike hit a civilian enterprise and damaged a petrol station, 10 homes, and empty railroad cars. In the afternoon, the city of Kharkiv was attacked again by 4 S-300 anti-aircraft missiles, striking another civilian business. 6 workers, ranging in age from 21 to 39, were wounded. On Sunday, the VKS dropped 3 bombs on the center of Kharkiv, wounding 15. Civilian infrastructure, 15 apartment buildings, private homes, an inactive sports complex, and office buildings were damaged. 3 victims are in hospital. In Kharkiv Oblast, the VKS bombed the village of Slobozhanske, killing a 49-year-old civilian. Shelling of the village Cherkassky Tishki wounded a 75-year-old pensioner. On Sunday, the VKS bombed Monachinivka, killing an 88-year-old in her home and wounding a 34-year-old man. Russian forces also shelled Kivsharivka, wounding a civilian. In Free Donetsk Oblast, the Slovyanska combined heat and power plant in Mykolaiivka was hit by 5 Smerch rockets, including 4 with cluster munition warheads. Workshops and plant infrastructure suffered significant damage. Smerch rockets also struck Pokrovsk, killing 2, and Drushkivka, wounding 1. In the settlement of Novogrodivka, a Russian drone dropped an F-1 grenade on a car with 3 civilians inside. The victims ranged from 49 to 68 and were all in hospital with significant blast injuries. The settlement is 19 kilometers from the known line of conflict. During Orthodox Easter services, the VKS struck a prayer house in Zavidne with a Fab-250 bomb. The bomb landed against the wall of the house of worship but didn't explode. No one was injured. Since February 24, 2022, when Russia expanded its war of aggression, over 500 churches, synagogues, mosques and temples have been destroyed. Religious buildings have protected status as culturally significant structures under international humanitarian law, and attacks on them are considered a war crime. Free Kherson Oblast was heavily shelled over the weekend. Fortunately, only 2 people were wounded. Near Bereslav, a semi-truck marked that it was carrying humanitarian aid was attacked. The driver and their passenger were uninjured, but the cargo of bottled drinking water was lost. On Saturday, Russia launched 2 Iskander-K ballistic cruise missiles from occupied Crimea, with at least 1 striking Odessa. Unspecified civilian infrastructure was hit, and 3 people were wounded. On Sunday, a grain elevator was destroyed near the city of Poltava. The facility was closed at the time of the attack. We did our best to cut through the fog of war on missile and drone attacks on the Dnipropetrovsk region. On Saturday, Shahed-136 drone debris caused damage to an electrical substation, knocking out area power and trapping workers in 2 mines. At the time of recording, the miners had returned to the surface, and water and electrical service had been restored. On Sunday, critical electrical infrastructure was significantly damaged in Sumy. At the time of publication, there were conflicting reports if the strike was by the VKS or a Shahed-136 one-way drone. Power, water and sewer service was out in most of the city. Local officials announced that critical infrastructure facilities such as hospitals had switched to alternative sources of power. Talking on Marathon, the Minister of Energy for Ukraine, Herman Galushchenko, said that in the last 2 weeks Russian attacks have damaged $1 billion of energy infrastructure. Since Russia expanded its war of aggression, the estimated damage to Ukraine's electrical infrastructure has climbed to $12.5 billion. The figure does not include Sunday's attacks on Mykolaiivka and Sumy and does not account for the restoration and recovery costs at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Next up, the Weekend Action Report. From May the 3rd to the 5th, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, or GSAFU, reported Russia carried out 319 assaults across the line of conflict. In the last 10 days, there have been 1,050 separate attacks, with the moving average climbing to 105 a day. On Saturday, the Defense Intelligence Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of the United Kingdom assessed that Russia had started its summer offensive. London believes that an increased number of attacks will continue for at least 8 weeks, adding that, quote, "It is likely that Russia's casualty rate will again increase." The intelligence report concludes that Moscow has transitioned to a purely attritional war, and the, quote, "reliance on mass will almost certainly continue for the duration of the Ukraine war and have long-lasting effects on Russia's future army." Last year, our analysts concluded that we underestimated Russian society's willingness to absorb losses. When Colonel General Alexander Syrsky became the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, he set a minimum goal of a 1-to-6 loss ratio, which we applauded. We maintain our early assessment that ideally Ukraine has to maintain a 1-to-10 loss ratio. Cluster munitions, restoring air parity, and expanding the use of one-way drones will help Ukraine achieve that goal. The Deputy Chief of the General Staff of the Estonian Defense Forces, Colonel Mart Vendla, also believes Russia started its summer offensive prematurely due to the restoration of US military aid. He also assessed that Russian advances will be localized. An unnamed, quote, high-ranking American official, speaking on the condition of anonymity to the New York Times, said that a classified Department of Defense assessment concluded that Ukraine's defensive lines would not collapse. The same report indicated that Russia would continue to make, quote, minor gains, unquote, in the eastern and southeastern parts of Ukraine, before increased US aid helps stabilize defensive lines, but not until the end of the summer. Over the weekend, the former Deputy Chief of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Lieutenant General Igor Romanenko, reached the same conclusion, saying that the Ukrainian military does not have enough equipment and ammunition to reach its full combat potential. The British news publication The Financial Times reported on Saturday that White House NSC advisor Jake Sullivan believes that renewed military aid will help Ukraine mount a counteroffensive in 2025. Sullivan was speaking at the FT Weekend Festival in Washington, D.C., and said that the new aid package passed by Congress last month will help Ukraine, quote, hold the line. Sullivan clarified that a 2025 counteroffensive would be dependent on more military aid from the United States and Ukraine's allies. Over the weekend, Russian forces continued to make tactically significant gains, mostly in alignment with our assessment on Thursday. Currently, Ukrainian commanders are trading territory for time and appear committed to preserving their favorable loss ratio. We updated the table for equipment losses through May 4, 2024, which includes the losses suffered during the Prigozhin insurrection of June 23–24, 2023, using information from the Oryx database. There's too much information for the podcast, but our subscribers get access to our almost daily situation reports. There is more information on how to become one in the podcast description. Now, let's talk about what happened on the battlefield. There were several changes in territorial control, and this is a good time to open up our war map. There is a link in the podcast description. Ready? Here we go. Starting in the Kharkiv Oblast, Russian forces made tactical gains in the Kupiansk Area of Operation, or EO. Russian forces launched attacks north and northwest of Sinkivka without success. The Russian Ministry of Defense, that's Armored, reported that Ukrainian forces counterattacked, and a geolocated video showed Ukrainian armored units attacking Russian positions in Liman-Pershey using indirect fire. East of Kupiansk, Russian forces have likely occupied the village of Kislivka. A geolocated video showed the Russian flag had been raised over a building on the western edge of Kotlярivka, indicating Ukrainian forces had withdrawn to the ridge near the P07 highway. GSAFU reported that Russian attacks in the direction of Pishane had been repulsed, but did not clarify if this was the hamlet west of Kislivka or the village near Krokhmalne. In the Svatove of Kharkiv and Luhansk oblasts, Russian forces continued to probe Ukrainian defensive lines, continuing their attacks near Berestove in Kharkiv Oblast. Russia also continued significant attacks in the direction of Stelmachivka in Luhansk Oblast, with one assault ending in disaster. A geolocated video showed a Russian tank firing on its own troops, destroying 2 squads using Chinese-sourced Desert Cross ATVs. Russian forces ended their attacks in the Raihorodka area. We'll link to the video, as well as most of the videos and pictures I mentioned in today's podcast, in the situation report. In the Kremenna AO of Luhansk Oblast, a Russian assault in the direction of Novosadove was repulsed. Russian attacks continued east of Terny and Torske with no change in the situation. Ukrainian forces continued their counterattacks east of Yampolivka and made new marginal gains, capturing 4 Russian soldiers. Mutual fighting continued south of Dubrova. We have additional information here, but still can't share it to support operational security. In occupied Kremenna, Ukraine fired rockets from M142 HIMARS striking the Druzhba theater, which Russian troops were using as a barracks. Pictures from Russian sources showed that the building was completely destroyed. In the Siverskaya of Luhansk Oblast, Russian forces continued their attempts to advance on Bilogorivka from the east. A Ukrainian drone found an abandoned Russian improvised armored turtle tank well east of the settlement. Russian troops continued their attacks southeast of Verkhnyokamyansk in Donetsk Oblast from Zolotarivka, with no change in the situation. Moving to the Donbass, let's start in northeastern Donetsk Oblast. In the Siversk and Soledar AOs, Russian forces continued intense attacks east of Spirne, southeast of Vyimka, and south of Rozdolivka. All of the attacks were repulsed. In the Konstantinivka AO, Operational Command East reported that the composition of the Russian assault forces was unchanged, with approximately 25,000 troops stretched from Bogdanivka to Kurdyumivka. We maintain this is an insufficient force to encircle Chasiv Yar and capture the plateau west of Klishchiivka. Russian commanders have likely not introduced additional reserves to the AO due to the breach near Avdiivka, which continues to be exploited. Despite the continued bombing of Chasiv Yar by the VKS, Russian forces have been unable to make any advances. Russian propagandists have started a disinformation campaign claiming that 1,500 French troops supported by German mercenaries are defending the settlement. This is a consistent tactic from Moscow and its proxies when faced with superior Ukrainian forces. Russian forces continued their attacks north of Klishchiivka and southeast of Andriivka with no change in the situation. In southwest Donetsk Oblast, Russian forces concentrated most of their offensive efforts in the Avdiivka AO and made additional tactical gains in the area of Ocheretine. There continues to be significant fog of war and a wide area between both combatants' forwardmost lines of friendly troops. My report on Friday that Ukrainian forces would be forced to withdraw from the lowlands between Arkhangelsk and Ocheretine due to the risk of encirclement was accurate. Russian troops captured both settlements, with the Russian flag raised over northwestern Arkhangelsk. Russian troops have almost reached the southeastern shore of the Kalynivsky Pond, and it is unclear how they can continue their advance in this direction. Southeast of Arkhangelsk, armored reported continued fighting in the area of Novokalinovo. Northwest of Ocheretine, Russian forces were unable to grow their bridgehead near Novoalexandrivka. Between Novobakhmutivka and Berdychi, there were numerous conflicting reports. Ukrainian sources reported that Russian troops continued their attempts to advance on Sokil and Novopokrovsk, while Russian sources reported fighting in the areas of Berdychi and Solovyovo. We did move the line of conflict further west near Berdychi and expanded the grey area. In Novopokrovsk, an M1A1 Abrams main battle tank, also called an MBT, with the Ukrainian 47th Motor Infantry Brigade was hit by multiple first-person view one-way drones, a Landsat UAV, artillery, and an anti-tank guided missile. The crew was able to evacuate the tank when it suffered mobility kill damage. A Landsat one-way drone also hit a Bradley infantry fighting vehicle, with the crew surviving and the vehicle recovered. South of Berdychi, Ukrainian units continued to hold the Durna River, where Russian sources reported continued fighting in the area of Semenivka. Through the weekend, mutual fighting persisted east of Umansk. To the southeast, Russian attacks in the direction of Yasnobrodivka were repulsed. Fighting also continued in Netailove, and Russian troops made marginal gains into the garden area south of Pervomaisk. Russian troops maintained their attacks in the Vuhledar, but Russian commanders appear to be treating this area as subordinate to Avdiivka. Russian forces raised a flag on the northwestern edge of the refractory factory in Krasnogorivka for a second time, with 3 soldiers appearing in the video. Ukrainian sources reported that fighting for control of the former train station on the southern edge of the settlement was ongoing, suggesting that Ukrainian troops are trying to cut off the Russian salient in the southwestern part of Krasnogorivka. To the south, Russian troops continued their attacks east of Georgiivka. On the eastern edge of Novomykhailivka, there was fog of war, with conflicting reports on which combatant controls Paraskoviivka, and GSAFU reporting that attacks in the area of Konstantinivka were repulsed. Russian forces continued their attempts to advance west of Solotke in the direction of Vodyane without success. Russian forces are sustaining their attacks in the Staromlinivka AO and have likely established an operational goal of advancing on Velika Novosilka. Russian reserves are reportedly building up in the AO. There were multiple platoon-sized armored assaults south of Urozhaine, which were unsuccessful. One video showed a Ukrainian T-64BV medium-duty tank engaging a Russian tank and 2 infantry fighting vehicles, destroying the lead Russian tank and forcing a retreat. In a second attempt, a Russian infantry fighting vehicle ran over a cluster of T-62 anti-tank mines and was obliterated. We congratulate the dismounts riding on the top for receiving their cosmonaut rating, posthumously. We link to both videos. Russian forces also continued sustained attacks west of Staromayorsk without success. On the Donetsk-Zaporizhzhia Oblast's administrative border, Russian forces attempted to advance in the direction of Novodarivka from Priyutne, suffered losses, and returned to their defensive positions. In the Orikhiv of Zaporizhzhia Oblast, mutual fighting continued in the no-man's land in and south of Robotine, with no change in the situation. In occupied Novokarlivka, a Ukrainian FPV one-way drone destroyed a garage with Russian vehicles in it. In occupied Berdyansk, Ukrainian traitor Yevhen Ananyevsky was killed in an Easter morning car bombing carried out by the GUR. That's the main Defense Intelligence Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Ananyevsky organized a torture chamber for Ukrainian POWs at the 77th Correctional Colony and was directly involved in the abuse of prisoners. The International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, released an update on the status of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Director General Rafael Grossi said that on Tuesday, the IAEA inspection team heard over 100 rounds of small arms gunfire near the plant. Russian occupiers claimed they were responding to a drone attack on the ZNPP training center, but did not permit an inspection. Grossi said the IAEA was aware of reports that Russian troops are using the center for drone operator training and launching attack drones from near Reactor 6, adding, quote, The IAEA experts at the ZNPP have not seen any evidence of drones being launched or the presence of launching pads within the site perimeter." Unquote. Rosatom still has not presented a comprehensive maintenance plan for 2024 and told the inspectors that they were planning to restart postponed maintenance work. Maintenance on Reactor 1 is ongoing, with Rosatom reporting that maintenance on Reactor 6 will start, quote, "around the middle of the year," unquote, and last 3 months. Inspectors were allowed to visit the switchyard for the 750 kV external power connection, but were denied access to the Zaporizhzhia thermal power plant. Inspectors were also allowed to visit the cooling pond and discharge channel, but were blocked from inspecting the isolation gate, quote, "due to security reasons." Russian occupiers also blocked access to the western parts of turbine halls 1 and 2. In the Kherson area, Russian forces launched 10 attacks on Ukrainian positions in Krinky on Saturday and 2 more on Sunday, with no change in the situation. Ukraine released a video showing a Russian patrol boat on the Dnipro River destroyed by a mine. We also congratulate this second group of new Russian cosmonauts.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
Here is my Theaterwide update. The Minister of Energy of Lithuania said that equipment for the repair of Ukraine's energy infrastructure was on its way from multiple European nations. As part of the Kremlin's non-kinetic warfare against Ukraine, Russia issued arrest warrants for almost a dozen high-level Ukrainian government officials, including President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky, former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, and the former Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council Alexei Danilov. Russia is not a signatory to the Rome Statute, and the warrants are unrecognized by Interpol and the International Criminal Court. In our assessment, this action is aimed at the Russian population to further legitimize the war of aggression against Ukraine and arm Russia's proxies as part of the ongoing global disinformation campaigns. Don't read the Twitter comments. Just don't. The Wall Street Journal reported that BlackRock and PIMCO are pressuring Ukraine to restart interest payments of $500 million a year on sovereign debt after US Congress approved their $61 billion aid package in April. The proposed deal would have Ukraine restarting the interest payments, and in exchange, a significant amount of the principal owed would be written off. Ukraine's creditors granted a moratorium on debt payments through August 2024, which is unlikely to be extended. US Ambassador to Ukraine Bridget Brink reiterated that Washington will not permit or support the use of US-provided weapons for strikes on the territory of Russia. The announcement came after Latvia and the UK said that their weapons could be used inside or outside of the 1991 Ukrainian borders. The New York Times reported that Ukrainian troops are going through a crash course in operating the Patriot air defense system in anticipation of a German-provided battery arriving in June. No other country has committed to providing Ukraine with additional Patriots, despite dozens sitting in storage in Europe, North America, and Asia. The Italian news source La Repubblica reported that Italy would provide Ukraine with a SAMP-T battery, which has similar capabilities to the Patriot. The report also claimed that Ukraine would receive Stinger man-portable air defense systems. Ukrainian Air Force Commander Mykola Oleshchuk released a mock-up of the F-16 in Ukrainian livery. The planes don't use the Ukrainian digital camo, instead employing a combination of ghost grey and off-white. The German arms manufacturer Rheinmetall said it would provide Ukraine with, quote, hundreds of thousands of 155mm artillery shells in 2024 and would transfer prototype munitions with a 100-kilometer range for combat testing. The announcement is not additive to earlier commitments, and no technical specifications were provided for the long-range artillery shells, which were likely already under development. Quick assessment. In 2018, Russia claimed that its new Tu-S-35 self-propelled howitzer would have a firing rate of up to 8 rounds per minute with a range of 80 kilometers using base-bleed 152mm artillery rounds. While serial production of the Tu-S-35 started in 2023, Russian units have been very vocal about its poor performance compared to the Tu-S-19. The 80-kilometer artillery rounds were never developed, but because Russia exaggerated its capabilities, the West almost certainly responded by creating a longer-range munition. The Rheinmetall shells have more than double the range of the US-produced Excalibur shell, with a published range of 45 kilometers. Excalibur has a range of over 50 kilometers when fired by the Swedish Archer SPG. The US company Felony Aero announced it had developed 2 attack drones specifically for Ukraine. The small company created one with a 5.56mm gun and a second with the world's smallest Spike anti-tank guided missile. We had previously assessed that the next leap in drone warfare would be the mounting of small arms on the platform for air-to-air combat and close air support. The Pentagon signed a $23.5 million contract with SARA to provide sensors that detect GPS jammers and guide a JDAM-ER glide bomb to the location. The contract is for the purchase of the sensors, not the development, indicating that SARA has been working on solving the Russian GPS jamming issue. The delivery date is unknown, and it wasn't specified if the sensors could be used with GLSDB, which is armed with a GBU-39 small-diameter bomb with a glide kit. German arms manufacturer Hensoldt announced it would provide Ukraine with 6 more TRML-4D air defense radars by the end of 2024. Bloomberg reported that the US is discussing with the G7 a scheme that would unlock $50 billion in aid to Ukraine using frozen Russian assets as collateral. Instead of the European Union plan passed in February that would drip funds to Ukraine in the form of interest payments, the US plan would provide Ukraine with $50 billion in a single package and then use the interest from the frozen assets to repay the funds. Currently, $3 to $4 billion in earned interest on frozen Russian assets are held in European banks awaiting transfer to Ukraine. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.